The eviction notice came on a Tuesday morning, taped to the door of the storage unit where Elena Rodriguez kept everything she owned. 48 hours to clear out or lose it all. She stood in the industrial parks parking lot at 6:47 a.m., her daughter Sofia asleep in the back seat of their 2009 Nissan Sentra, and read the words 3 times before they made sense. Unit 247, final notice. Outstanding balance, $1,840. Payment required by Thursday, 5 p.m., or contents will be seized and sold at auction. $1,840. Elena had $127 in her checking account. Her next paycheck from the diner wouldn't come for 5 more days. The math was simple and brutal. She was going to lose the last physical proof that her life had once been different, that she'd once had furniture and dishes and photograph albums, and Sofia's baby clothes carefully packed in labeled boxes. The November wind cut through her work uniform, the polyester fabric doing nothing to keep out the cold. She folded the notice carefully and slid it into her pocket next to her phone, which had 14 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Bill collectors, probably. Or maybe the landlord from the apartment they'd been evicted from 3 months ago, still trying to collect the balance she owed. Sofia stirred in the back seat, 9 years old with dark hair tangled from sleeping in a car. Again, for the 83rd night in a row, not that Elena was counting. Except she was. She counted everything now. Days homeless, dollars remaining, hours until her shift started, miles she could drive before the gas light came on. Mom. Sofia's voice was small and careful, the voice of a child who'd learned not to ask for things. Is it morning? Yeah, baby. Time to get ready for school. They went through their routine with practiced efficiency. Drive to the Planet Fitness 3 miles away, where Elena maintained a $10 monthly membership specifically for the showers. 20 minutes to wash, dress, and transform from 2 people sleeping in a car into a waitress and a 4th grader who looked like they belonged in the normal world. Sofia's school uniform was pressed. Elena had learned to hang clothes on the car's grab handles overnight, so wrinkles fell out. Her daughter's lunch was packed in a brown paper bag, the same lunch she'd eaten for 2 months. Peanut butter sandwich, apple, granola bar, and a juice box bought in bulk from the dollar store. Mrs. Patterson asked if you could help with the fall festival next week, Sofia said as Elena braided her hair in the Planet Fitness parking lot. Both of them squeezed between the front seats, making do. Elena's chest tightened. The fall festival required baked goods or volunteer time, and she had neither. I'll try, sweetie. My schedule's just really busy right now. Sofia nodded like she'd expected that answer, and Elena hated herself a little more. The drive to Sofia's school took 12 minutes through morning traffic. Elena parked 3 blocks away, far enough that the other parents wouldn't see which car Sofia emerged from. Her daughter shouldered her backpack, the strap held together with safety pins, and turned back with those serious dark eyes that seemed too old for 9. Mom, are you okay? I'm fine, baby. You have a good day at school. Learn something amazing. I always do. Sofia smiled, and for just a moment, Elena could pretend everything was fine. Then her daughter walked toward the school building, and Elena watched her blend into the crowd of children whose parents had homes and grocery budgets and the luxury of worrying about normal things. Elena's shift at Rosie's Diner started at 7:30. She arrived at 7:15, parked in the back lot, and sat for 5 minutes trying to summon the energy to smile at customers and pretend her feet didn't hurt from standing on concrete for 8 hours yesterday, and the day before, and every day for the past 4 months since this became her life. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Elena almost ignored it, but unknown numbers sometimes meant shifts she could pick up, extra hours that translated to gas money or that storage unit payment she desperately needed. Hello. Is this Elena Rodriguez? The voice was professional, male, with an accent she couldn't place. British, maybe? Yes, who's calling? My name is Charles Whitmore. I'm calling from Whitmore & Associates in Chicago. We're handling the estate of Gerald Torres. I understand he was your uncle. Elena's brain stuttered over the name. Uncle Gerald, her father's older brother who'd moved to Chicago 30 years ago and never came back. The one who sent Christmas cards with $5 bills tucked inside when she was little but stopped when she turned 12. She'd seen him exactly 3 times in her life, the last being her father's funeral 6 years ago, where he'd stood in the back of the church and left before anyone could talk to him. Ah, yes. He was my uncle. Has something happened? I'm afraid Mr. Torres passed away 4 months ago. His estate has been settled, and you've been named as a beneficiary. The parking lot seemed to tilt. Elena gripped the steering wheel and tried to process words that didn't make sense in any context she understood. I'm sorry, what? Your uncle left you property in his will. A commercial building in Oak Ridge, Illinois. The details are somewhat unusual, which is why the estate took time to process. I'd like to schedule a call to discuss. What kind of property? Whitmore paused. An old factory. It hasn't been operational in decades. The building is in significant disrepair, I'm told, but it's yours if you wish to claim it. Otherwise, it will be sold and proceeds distributed according to the will's secondary instructions. How much is it worth? Another pause, longer this time. The property was assessed at $800 for tax purposes. The structure is condemned. You'd likely need to pay for demolition if you took ownership. $800. Elena almost laughed. Her uncle had died and left her an $800 building that would probably cost thousands to deal with. It was the perfect punctuation to the worst year of her life. Ms. Rodriguez, do you wish to proceed with the inheritance, or shall we move to alternate distribution? Elena looked at the diner's back door at the grease-stained entrance she'd walked through in 8 minutes to spend another day serving eggs and coffee to people who mostly didn't tip. She thought about the storage unit, about Sofia asking careful questions, about sleeping in a car, and pretending this was temporary when it was starting to feel permanent. What I need to do to claim it? Sign documents. Arrange transfer of the deed. There's also a small fund, $2,500, designated for travel expenses should you wish to inspect the property before deciding. $2,500. That would save the storage unit. That would be first month's rent on a cheap apartment, or at least security deposit. That was 3 months of not drowning. I'll claim it. Send me whatever I need to sign. The conversation ended with promises of emails and documents and timelines. Elena sat in her car for the remaining 4 minutes before her shift, staring at nothing, trying to understand what had just happened. An $800 factory in Illinois. Condemned and worthless, and somehow hers. It felt like the universe laughing. The email arrived during Elena's lunch break, which wasn't really a break, so much as 15 minutes where she sat in the storage closet that smelled like bleach and ate a granola bar she'd saved from Sofia's lunch supplies. Her phone screen showed an attachment from Whitmore and Associates. Estate documentation, Gerald Torres. She opened it with hands that shook from too much coffee and not enough sleep. The first page confirmed what Whitmore had said. Gerald Torres, deceased September 3rd at age 72. No surviving spouse, no children. Estate valued at $47,000 after debts and funeral costs, distributed among various charities. And then, separately, one piece of property left specifically to his niece, Elena Maria Rodriguez. The Kite factory building, 1847, Industrial Way, Oak Ridge, Illinois. 2.3 acres. Structure built 1952. Last operational 1987. Current condition, condemned. Assessed value, $800. There were photographs attached. Elena swiped through them with growing dismay. The building was massive, maybe 3 stories tall, stretching what looked like a full city block. Red brick turned dark with decades of weathering. Windows broken or boarded over. The roof sagged in places, and entire sections of wall looked like they were held up by nothing but habit and stubbornness. One photo showed the front entrance. Double doors hanging crooked on broken hinges, graffiti covering the lower walls. Another showed the back of the building where a chain-link fence had been erected. Those sections had collapsed. Warning signs plastered every visible surface, and no trespassing. Condemned structure. Enter at own risk. The last photo showed what must have been the building's glory days. Black and white, probably from the 50s or 60s. The same brick structure, but pristine, with cars parked out front and people visible through windows. A sign above the entrance read, Torres Aeronautical Testing Facility. Below that in smaller letters, makers of fine kites and wind research equipment. Elena stared at that last photo and tried to reconcile it with the ruin in the other images. Uncle Gerald had owned a kite factory. Not just owned. Apparently his father had built it. The Torres family business that she'd never even known existed. Rodriguez, you're up. Tommy's voice cut through her thoughts. The lunch rush was starting, and she had tables to serve. She shoved her phone in her pocket and went back to work, but her mind kept returning to those photos. To the building sitting empty in Illinois, crumbling slowly while her uncle did. What? Held on to it for decades? Let it rot. The shift ended at 3:30. Elena drove straight to Sofia's school, arriving 20 minutes early to sit in the pickup line and read through the estate documents more carefully. The legal language was dense, but certain details emerged. Gerald Torres had specified that Elena could inspect the property before finalizing the inheritance. If she chose not to claim it, the building would be sold at auction, with proceeds going to some aeronautical museum in Ohio. If she did claim it, all costs associated with the property, taxes, demolition, environmental cleanup, became her responsibility. There was a note from Whitmore at the bottom. I feel obligated to mention that several property developers in Oak Ridge have expressed interest in the land. The building itself is worthless, but the location has value. You could potentially sell immediately upon transfer for $15,000 to $25,000, enough to cover assumption costs and provide small profit. I can provide contact information for interested parties. $15,000 to $25,000. That was rent for a year. That was stability and breathing room and not sleeping in a car. Elena read that paragraph 5 times, letting herself imagine what that money could do. Sofia appeared at the pickup curb with 2 other girls, laughing about something. She saw the car, and her expression shifted. Not sad, exactly, but resigned. Like she was remembering what waited for her instead of going home to do homework at a real table. Hey baby, how was school? Good. We start a unit on weather patterns. Did you know that wind speed increases with altitude because there's less friction from the ground? Elena pulled into traffic, heading toward the public library where Sofia could do homework while Elena applied for jobs on the public computers. That's fascinating. Tell me more. Sofia launched into an explanation involving something called the Coriolis effect and boundary layers, using her hands to demonstrate air movement. She'd always been like this, fascinated by how things worked. Give her a broken appliance, and she'd spend hours taking it apart to understand the mechanism inside. It physically hurt to know that curiosity was being wasted in a car instead of nurtured in a stable home. At the library, Elena set Sofia up at a table near the children's section, then moved to the adult computers to continue the job search she'd been conducting for 4 months. Applications sent into the void, administrative assistant positions, retail management, anything that paid more than the diner and didn't require a degree she'd never finished. But her mind kept drifting back to the factory, to Uncle Gerald, who'd apparently held onto this building for decades despite it being worthless, to that black and white photo showing what it had been, to the $2,500 travel fund and the possibility of $15,000 to $25,000 if she sold the land. She opened a new browser tab and searched Oak Ridge, Illinois. Small town, population 8,400, located about 40 minutes outside Chicago. Main industries, manufacturing and agriculture. The downtown looked charming in the Google Street View images, brick buildings and tree-lined streets. The kind of place that probably still had a town square and local diner that had been there since the 50s. She searched Torres Kite Factory, Oak Ridge, Illinois. The results were sparse. A historical society page mentioning the factory as part of Oak Ridge's industrial heritage. An old newspaper article from 1987 about the closure, mentioning economic downturns and changing industries. A few aerial photos showing the building in various states of decline. One result caught her attention. A blog post from an urban explorer who'd apparently snuck into the building 5 years ago. The photos showed vast interior spaces, empty except for debris and pigeon droppings. Catwalks and machinery covered in rust. A wind tunnel, that's what the blogger called it, dominating one entire section of the building. Easily 100 feet long, the post read, "Built for testing aerodynamics." Must have been incredible when it was operational. Elena stared at that phrase. Wind tunnel. She thought this was just a factory that made kites, children's toys. But the old sign had said aeronautical testing facility. And there was a wind tunnel big enough to impress urban explorers decades after abandonment. "Mom." Sofia appeared beside her, homework apparently finished. "What are you looking at?" Elena almost closed the browser, but something stopped her. Instead, she turned the screen so Sofia could see. "My Uncle Gerald died. He left me a building." Sofia's eyes went wide. "Like a whole building? That's amazing." "It's not amazing, baby. It's abandoned and falling apart. See?" She pulled up the recent photos. Nobody's used it in over 30 years. But Sofia wasn't looking at the decay. She was staring at that black and white photo, at the sign mentioning aeronautical testing. "Mom, this isn't just a kite factory. This is an aerospace research facility. Look, aeronautical testing. That means they were studying flight dynamics, probably doing actual research." "How do you know that?" "We learn about it in science. The Wright brothers used wind tunnels to test wing shapes before they built their plane. NASA uses huge ones to test spacecraft. If your uncle had one of these." She scrolled through the blog post, reading quickly. "Mom, wind tunnels are expensive. Like really expensive. Even old ones." Elena felt something shift in her chest. "It's probably broken. Everything in there is broken. But what if it's not? What if there's equipment or research or—" Sofia's face lit up with the kind of excitement Elena hadn't seen in months. "We should go look. We should go see what's there." "Sofia, it's in Illinois. That's a 12-hour drive. You said there's travel money." The paper said $2,500 for travel expenses. Elena looked at her daughter, at the spark of hope and curiosity burning through the careful resignation she'd worn for months. And she thought about the storage unit notice in her pocket, about the $127 in her checking account, about sleeping in a car and serving eggs to people who didn't see her as human. Even if we went, even if we looked, it's still just a condemned building. The best thing I could do is sell the land and take whatever money I can get. But you haven't seen it yet. What if? Sofia trailed off, and Elena could see her daughter fighting against hope, knowing better than to believe good things happen to people like them. What if? Those two words have been dangerous for a long time. What if the apartment landlord gave them more time? What if one of the job applications paid off? What if David decided to pay child support like the court ordered instead of disappearing to Arizona? What if had only ever led to disappointment? But sitting in the public library with her 9-year-old daughter, who was explaining aerospace engineering with granola bar-fueled enthusiasm, Elena let herself consider the possibility. The travel money was real. The building was real. And maybe, just maybe, there was something they're worth more than $800. "Okay," she heard herself say. "We'll go look." Sofia's squeal turned heads throughout the library. The librarian shot them a stern look, and Sofia immediately covered her mouth. But her eyes shone with something Elena had almost forgotten existed, genuine excitement. They spent the next hour planning. Elena emailed Whitmore and Associates confirming she'd accept the inheritance and requesting access to the travel fund. She searched for cheap motels in Oak Ridge. The cheapest was $47 a night, which made her stomach hurt, but they could do 2 nights and still have money left over. She mapped the route, 12 hours if they drove straight through, but they'd need to stop for gas twice, maybe 3 times. She calculated costs in the margins of Sofia's homework. Gas $90, motel $94, food $60 if they were careful. Total, $244. That left $2,256, which could save the storage unit and buy groceries and keep the car insurance current. Unless there was actually something valuable in that building. Unless Uncle Gerald had held on to it for reasons that had nothing to do with sentiment. Unless what if actually meant something this time. That night, they slept in the Planet Fitness parking lot, which was safer than the Walmart lot, where security sometimes knocked on windows. Elena reclined her seat and tried to ignore the ache in her back, while Sofia slept in the back, wrapped in the emergency blankets they'd been using as bedding for 3 months. Her phone buzzed with an email. Whitmore and Associates, confirming travel fund transfer. It would appear in her account by tomorrow afternoon. The documents were ready for her signature. She could access the property immediately upon arrival in Oak Ridge. The keys were being held by a local attorney, Martin Reeves, whose contact information was included. Elena read the email 3 times, waiting for the catch. But there wasn't one. This was real. In 2 days, she and Sofia would be in Illinois, standing in front of a building that used to make kites and test aerodynamics and apparently had a 100-foot wind tunnel. She thought about Uncle Gerald, who she'd barely known. Tried to remember the man from her father's funeral, tall and thin, with weathered hands and sad eyes that seemed to be looking at something no one else could see. He'd stood alone in the back of the church and left without speaking to anyone, and Elena had thought it was strange but hadn't pursued it. Her father had just died, and she'd had a 3-year-old to care for, and Uncle Gerald was just another person who existed at the periphery of her life. Now he'd left her building. Not money, not stocks, not anything conventional. An $800 condemned factory that made kites once upon a time. Why? The question kept her awake longer than the uncomfortable seat. Why leave her this specific thing? Why not sell it himself if it was worthless? Why hold on to it for decades, paying taxes and letting it decay? Her father used to say Gerald was the smart one in the family, the one who understood how things worked, who could fix anything, who saw patterns other people missed. He could have been an engineer, her father had said once. Could have worked for NASA or Boeing. Instead, he built kites in Illinois and called it a life. There had been sadness in those words, like her father thought Gerald had wasted his potential. But what if he hadn't? What if the kite factory was something more than it appeared? Elena finally fell asleep with that question circling her mind. In her dreams, she walked through a massive building filled with equipment she didn't understand, following a path her uncle had left for her, knowing somehow that finding the end of it mattered more than anything. She woke at 6:15 to Sofia, tapping on the window from outside. Her daughter had already changed into her school uniform in the Planet Fitness bathroom and was holding 2 granola bars and a bottle of water. "We need to get going, or I'll be late for school," Sofia said as Elena unlocked the door. "But Mom, I was thinking, if the factory really did aeronautical research, there might be patents. Like official patents for designs or equipment. Those could be worth something even if they're old." Elena took the granola bar and tried to wake up enough to follow her daughter's train of thought. "How do you know about patents?" "We studied inventors last month. Thomas Edison had over 1,000 patents. Some of them are still valuable today because people use the technology. If your uncle was testing flight dynamics and wind resistance, he might have invented new ways to measure things or new designs for." "Sofia, honey, let's not get our hopes up. It's probably just an old building with nothing in it." But Sofia's enthusiasm was infectious, and as Elena drove to the diner for another shift, she found herself thinking about patents and research and the possibility that Uncle Gerald had been smarter than anyone gave him credit for. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Every table wanted something. Every customer seemed to need extra attention, and the lunch rush lasted 90 minutes longer than usual. But finally, 3:30 came, and Elena was driving to Sofia's school with her phone showing a new notification. Deposit confirmed. $2,500. The number looked fake. Elena had gotten used to her balance hovering in double digits. Seeing 4 digits felt like someone else's screenshot, like this was happening to another person in another life. She picked up Sofia and drove straight to the stored facility. Paid the outstanding balance, plus 1 month ahead. The manager processed the payment with barely a glance. And just like that, Elena's possessions were safe for another 30 days. "We're really doing this," she said as they pulled out of the parking lot. "We're driving to Illinois. When do we leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Early. If we drive straight through, we can be there by evening." They spent that night at the Planet Fitness like usual, but this time Elena used the Wi-Fi to print directions and research Oak Ridge more thoroughly. The Historical Society website had old photos of the factory in operation, workers on the assembly line, finished kites hanging from the ceiling in bright colors, a touring group looking at something in what must have been the wind tunnel. One caption caught her attention. Dr. Gerald Torres demonstrates aerodynamic testing to visiting military officials, 1962. Doctor. Her uncle had a doctorate? In what? Aerospace engineering, probably, given the context. But then why make kites? Why stay in a small Illinois town instead of going to work for the big companies? Elena clicked on related articles and found an obituary from the Oak Ridge Gazette, published 4 months ago. Gerald Torres, 72, passed away peacefully on September 3rd. Dr. Torres was a longtime resident of Oak Ridge and former owner of Torres Aeronautical Testing Facility. He earned his doctorate in aerospace engineering from MIT in 1951 and spent his career researching wind dynamics and flight mechanics. He is survived by nieces and nephews. No services were held per his request. Donations may be made to the National Air and Space Museum. MIT. Her uncle had gone to MIT, and then he'd come to small-town Illinois and built kites and apparently conducted serious aerospace research that military officials toured. The pieces weren't fitting together in any way that made sense. Mom, look at this. Sofia had been scrolling through her own research on Elena's phone. I found a patent database. You can search by inventor name. Want me to search for Gerald Torres? Go ahead. Sofia typed quickly, then froze. Mom, you need to see this. Elena leaned over. The screen showed a patent database result. Torres, Gerald, 47 patents filed between 1953 to 1986. 47 patents. Elena clicked on the first one, dated 1953. Improved wind tunnel design for low-speed aerodynamic testing. The abstract was full of technical language she didn't understand, but certain phrases stood out. Novel approach to airflow management, reduced turbulence, increased accuracy. The second patent was for something called a variable pressure wind testing chamber. The third was for advanced kite design with self-stabilizing characteristics. Sofia scrolled through the list, and they just kept coming. Patents for testing equipment, for measurement devices, for kite designs that incorporated aerospace principles and stability optimization. Mom, if these patents are valuable, they're probably expired. Patents don't last forever. But even as she said it, Elena was clicking through to read more. Some of the patents had been filed in the 1980s, which meant they might still be active. Others showed currently licensed status, which she didn't fully understand but seemed important. One patent in particular made her stop scrolling. Vertical wind tunnel configuration for efficient testing, filed in 1967. The status showed active. License 2, restricted defense contract. What does that mean? Sofia asked. Restricted defense contract? I have no idea. But something cold and excited was forming in Elena's chest. This wasn't just about old patents for kites. This was about genuine aerospace research, some of which was apparently still being used for military applications. And Uncle Gerald had left for the building where it all happened. They barely slept that night. Sofia kept reading patent abstracts aloud, getting excited about technical details she half understood. Elena lay in the reclined driver's seat and tried to manage expectations, to not let hope take root, to remember that patents didn't necessarily mean money and that the building itself was still condemned and worthless. But hope was stubborn. It had survived 3 months of homelessness and a failed marriage and a year of watching her daughter pretend everything was fine. It could survive a 12-hour drive to find out if Uncle Gerald's last gift was rescue or just another disappointment. At 5 a.m., they got up and started driving. Elena had packed everything they'd need in the trunk: clothes, toiletries, the folder of estate documents, Sofia's homework, and every granola bar they had left. The sun rose somewhere over Missouri, painting the highway in shades of gold and orange. Sofia slept in the back seat with her jacket as a pillow. The radio played quietly, and Elena drove with both hands on the wheel and a question burning in her mind. What had Uncle Gerald been protecting in that factory for 35 years? They stopped for gas in Missouri, and Elena let Sofia pick out snacks from the convenience store. $5 total. Chips and a candy bar they'd split. Small luxuries that felt enormous when you'd been rationing granola bars for months. How much longer? Sofia asked as they pulled back onto the highway. About 7 more hours. Maybe we can stop for lunch somewhere cheap. Sofia nodded and went back to reading patent summaries on Elena's phone. She'd been taking screenshots of the most interesting ones, creating a folder she'd labeled Uncle Gerald's inventions. The enthusiasm was both heartwarming and terrifying. Elena didn't want to crush her daughter's hope, but she also needed to prepare her for the likelihood that this would be nothing. Mom, this one is really cool. It's for a device that measures air pressure changes in real time using some kind of sensor array. The patent says it was way more accurate than anything else available in the 1970s. That's great, baby. Do you think it's still in the factory? Like the actual device? I don't know. Probably everything was cleared out when it closed. But even as she said it, Elena remembered the Urban Explorer's blog. The photos had shown equipment still in place, rusted and abandoned. But there, what if Gerald had just locked the doors and walked away? What if 35 years of research and equipment was still sitting there, waiting? They crossed into Illinois around 2 p.m. The landscape had changed from Missouri's rolling hills to flatter terrain, farmland stretching in every direction. Small towns appeared every 20 miles, each one looking like it had been prosperous once and was now just holding on. Elena's phone rang. Unknown number, but with an Illinois area code. Hello, Ms. Rodriguez? This is Martin Reeves. I'm the attorney in Oak Ridge handling the key transfer for your property. Oh, yes. Hi. We're actually on our way there now. Should arrive around 6 or 7 tonight. Excellent. I should warn you, the property is in significant disrepair. The town has been trying to get it demolished for years, but your uncle fought them on it. Now that you're the owner, they'll likely approach you about either renovating or tearing it down. The building is a safety hazard. Elena's stomach sank. How bad are we talking? Structural damage, environmental concerns from old materials, potential asbestos. If you're planning to sell, I'd recommend doing so quickly before the town forces your hand on cleanup costs. Mr. Reeves, do you know why my uncle held on to it? If it was worthless and dangerous, why not just sell? There was a long pause. Your uncle was particular about that building. He came by my office once a year to pay the property taxes in cash. Never missed a payment in 35 years. When I asked him why he kept it, he said he was protecting something important. I assumed he meant memories, family history. But he was very clear that the building couldn't be disturbed until after his death. Protecting something important. Elena felt the cold excitement return. Did he ever say what? No. He was private about his work. Brilliant man, though. Worked with NASA in the early days, I understand. Could have had a major career, but chose to come back to Oak Ridge. Another pause. Ms. Rodriguez, I'll be frank. Several developers have contacted my office about the property. The land alone is worth $20,000, maybe $25,000. The building would cost $50,000 to demolish safely. If you're struggling financially, and I'm not making assumptions, but estate transfers often happen during difficult times, selling quickly might be your best option. $20,000 to $25,000. That number again. Life-changing money for Elena, but apparently pocket change for developers. I'd like to see it first before making any decisions. Of course. I'll meet you at the property at 6:30 if that works. I have the keys and some documentation your uncle left sealed with instructions to give to his heir. Sealed documentation. Elena's pulse quickened. What kind of documentation? I don't know. He left it with me 15 years ago with instructions not to open it. Said whoever inherited the property would need it. They ended the call, and Elena immediately told Sofia everything. Her daughter's eyes went wide. He left sealed documents. Mom, that means there's definitely something there. Something he wanted you to find, but nobody else could know about. Or it's just sentimental items, and we're reading too much into this. But Sofia was already spinning theories. What if he invented something really valuable and hid it in the factory? What if that's why he fought the town on demolition? Because he needed to keep the building intact until someone he trusted could find it. Baby, that sounds like a movie plot. So does a homeless single mom inheriting a mysterious factory from an uncle she barely knew. Elena couldn't argue with that logic. They drove the last 4 hours with growing anticipation. The sun was setting as they reached Oak Ridge, and Elena's first impression was of a town that time had gently abandoned. Main Street had the bones of prosperity. Beautiful brick buildings from the early 1900s, wide sidewalks, old-fashioned streetlights. But half the storefronts were empty, and the ones that remained looked like they were hanging on through stubbornness rather than profitability. Following GPS directions, they drove past downtown toward the industrial district. The factory appeared suddenly, and Elena's breath caught. It was massive, 3 stories of dark red brick stretching nearly a full block. The photos hadn't captured the scale. Windows ran in regular rows across all 3 floors, most broken or boarded. The roof sagged in the middle, and vegetation had claimed sections of the wall where brick had crumbled away. But despite the decay, there was something magnificent about it. The architecture suggested purpose and pride. This had been built to last, built to matter. A faded sign above the main entrance still showed traces of letters. Torres Aeronautical Testing Facility. Elena parked across the street, and they sat in silence, staring. "It's huge," Sofia whispered. A silver BMW pulled up behind them. A man in his 60s emerged, carrying a briefcase. Martin Reeves, presumably. He approached with an extended hand. "Ms. Rodriguez?" "Martin Reeves." "Elena. This is my daughter, Sofia." Martin shook Sofia's hand with the same seriousness he'd shown Elena, which earned him points. Then he turned to look at the building, and his expression was complicated. "Your uncle loved this place. Fought every attempt to condemn it. The town council hated him for it. This building is an eyesore and a liability. But Gerald had lawyers, good ones, and he knew how to work the system." Martin pulled out a key ring with 2 old brass keys. "These open the main entrance. I should warn you, the interior is dangerous. Floors are unstable in places, there's debris everywhere, and we have no idea what's structurally sound anymore. Has anyone been inside recently?" "Not legally. Kids break in sometimes, urban explorers. Your uncle had it monitored by a security company until his death. They'd remove trespassers but didn't report them to police. He didn't want attention drawn to the property. That was strange. Why prevent trespassing but not prosecute it?" Martin handed over the keys, then pulled a large manila envelope from his briefcase. It was sealed with red wax, old-fashioned and dramatic. "This is what your uncle left. He was very specific. It goes to his heir unopened. Whatever's inside, he wanted you to discover it yourself." Elena took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavier than expected, something solid inside along with papers. "There's one more thing." Martin pulled out a letter, not sealed, and read from it. "This is from Gerald's instructions to me. Tell my heir that the answer is in the tunnel, where the wind remembers. Trust your eyes and trust the math. What I built doesn't decay." Sofia and Elena exchanged glances. "The wind tunnel. It had to be. What does that mean?" Elena asked. "I have no idea. Your uncle was cryptic in his old age. Brilliant, but cryptic." Martin handed over a folder of documents. Property deed, tax records, engineering reports from various inspections over the years. The most recent assessment from 2019 condemned the building, but noted that the wind tunnel structure itself remains remarkably intact. Something about the materials used, experimental alloys, or some such. "I don't understand the technical details." He wished them luck and left, driving away as the last daylight faded. Elena and Sofia stood on the broken sidewalk, staring up at 3 stories of secrets. "Should we go in?" Sofia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Not tonight. It's getting dark, and we don't know what we're walking into. Tomorrow morning, with good light and proper preparation." They checked into the roadside inn, Oak Ridge's only motel. $47 for a room that smelled like cigarettes and had a TV that only played 3 channels. But it had 2 beds and a bathroom and a door that locked, and after 3 months in a car, it felt like luxury. While Sofia showered, Elena opened the sealed envelope. Inside was a letter in her uncle's handwriting, shaky but legible, along with something metallic that clinked as it fell into her palm. A key. smaller than the building keys, silver with an unusual shape. The letter read, Elena, if you're reading this, you've come to Oak Ridge. Good. That means you're curious or desperate or both. Either works. I barely knew you. Saw you 3 times in your life. But your father told me about you before he died. Told me you were the smart one, the stubborn one, the one who didn't give up even when giving up made more sense. He was proud of you. Said you were raising Sofia alone and doing a damn good job of it. I never had kids. Spent my whole life in this factory instead, working on problems nobody else cared about. Made kites because people understood kites. But the kites were never the point. The point was the wind. Understanding it. Measuring it. Mastering it. In 1962, I designed something the military wanted. They offered me $2 million for it. I said no. They offered $5 million. I said no. They threatened to seize it under national security protocols. So I hid it. I've spent 35 years protecting what I built. The patents they know about are real, but incomplete. The valuable work is hidden where only someone looking properly would find it. The small key opens a storage locker in the wind tunnel control room. Inside is documentation for patents I never filed, designs I never showed anyone, technology that was 30 years ahead of its time in 1962 and might still be ahead now. If you're reading this, you need money. Everyone always needs money. Sell what you find for whatever you can get. I don't care about legacy or recognition. I care that it goes to someone who will use it to take care of their family. But Elena, and this is important, don't show anyone what you find until you understand what you have. The military still watches this building. So do competitors. The moment word gets out, you'll have lawyers and offers and pressure. Get your own expert first. Someone you trust who understands aerospace patents. The answer is in the tunnel, where the wind remembers. Your uncle, Gerald. Elena read the letter 3 times. Sofia emerged from the shower and read it 4 times. Mom. Sofia's voice shook. He hid something valuable. Something the military wanted. Something worth millions. Maybe. Or maybe he was paranoid in his old age, and there's nothing there. But Elena's hands were shaking as she held the small silver key. This wasn't paranoia. This was a man who'd spent 35 years protecting something, who'd fought a town council and paid taxes on a worthless building and left cryptic messages for an heir he barely knew. Gerald Torres had hidden something in that wind tunnel. Something important enough to refuse $5 million for. Something that might still be valuable decades later. And tomorrow, Elena and Sofia would find out what. They tried to sleep, but couldn't. Sofia lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, occasionally saying things like, what if it's worth $10 million? Or, what if there are blueprints for something that could change aerospace engineering? Elena lay in her own bed and tried not to let hope take root. But it was too late. Hope had already sprouted, and now was growing wild, filling her chest with dangerous possibility. Around midnight, Sofia finally spoke the fear they were both thinking. Mom, what if we find something amazing and then lose it? What if the military takes it, or someone tricks us, or then we'll deal with it together, like we always do. But we're not good at this. We don't know about patents or military contracts or Sofia. Elena sat up and looked at her daughter in the dim light from the parking lot filtering through thin curtains. We've survived 3 months homeless. We've figured out how to shower at a gym and do homework in a library and keep you in school while I work full-time. If there's something valuable in that building, we'll figure out how to protect it. Okay, Sofia nodded, but her eyes were still worried. Elena crossed her daughter's bed and lay down beside her. Both of them squished in the narrow twin and held her until she fell asleep. Elena stayed awake much longer, staring at the water-stained ceiling and thinking about Uncle Gerald. About a man brilliant enough to earn a doctorate from MIT, but who chose to make kites in small-town Illinois. About someone who refused $5 million and hid his life's work instead of letting the government take it. About a stranger who'd watched from a distance and decided Elena was the right person to trust with whatever he'd protected. The responsibility of that trust felt enormous. But so did the possibility. Tomorrow, they would enter the Torres Aeronautical Testing Facility. They would find the wind tunnel and the control room and the storage locker that opened with a small silver key. And maybe, just maybe, they would find the answer that would change everything. Elena finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., and her dreams were filled with wind and keys and her uncle's voice saying, "Trust your eyes and trust the math. What I built doesn't decay." When she woke at 6:30, Sofia was already up, dressed, and vibrating with nervous energy. "Mom, today's the day." "Yeah, baby, today's the day." They ate breakfast at a diner 2 blocks from the motel, eggs and toast and coffee that Elena let Sofia taste even though she was too young for caffeine. Both of them needed the fortification. At 8 a.m., they drove back to the factory. In morning light, it looked even more massive and more decrepit. Boards covered most of the first-floor windows. Graffiti decorated the accessible walls. The front entrance doors hung at angles that suggested the hinges had given up years ago. Elena parked and sat with her hands on the steering wheel, gathering courage. "We should be careful," she said. "Watch for unstable floors, exposed nails, anything dangerous." "I'll be careful, I promise." They got out of the car. Elena had brought flashlights from the motel's emergency kit and had bought work gloves at a gas station. They approached the main entrance, and Elena fitted the first brass key into the lock. It turned smoothly, which surprised her. The door groaned open, revealing darkness and the smell of abandonment, mildew and rust and decades of dust. Elena clicked on her flashlight. The beam cut through the dimness, revealing a reception area that must have been impressive once. A desk still stood against one wall, covered in debris. Behind it, a directory board listed departments: administration, design, manufacturing, testing. Sofia's flashlight found a doorway marked testing facility, authorized personnel only. "That way," she whispered. They walked deeper into the building, and Elena felt the weight of history pressing down. This place had been alive once. People had worked here, created here, discovered things here. Now it was just a shell, waiting to reveal its final secret. The hallway opened into a vast space, and Elena's flashlight beam couldn't find the far wall. The wind tunnel. It had to be. She swept her light across the space, and gradually the structure revealed itself. A massive cylinder, at least 100 feet long and 15 feet in diameter, suspended on support structures that looked more like they belonged in a museum than an abandoned factory. The metal surface showed age, but not decay. Gerald had been right about that. Whatever alloy he'd used, it had survived decades better than the building around it. "Mom," Sofia's voice was odd. "It's beautiful." It was. Despite the abandonment, despite the rust and debris and collapsed ceiling sections, the wind tunnel stood intact. Proud, waiting. Now they just had to find the control room and discover what Uncle Gerald had hidden there. The control room was exactly where the faded floor plan indicated. Elevated platform accessed by a metal staircase on the tunnel's eastern side. Elena tested each step before committing weight, the metal groaning but holding. Sofia followed close behind, her flashlight beam dancing across walls covered in switches and gauges that hadn't been touched in decades. The door to the control room hung partially open. Elena pushed it wider, and hinges shrieked in protest. Inside was a space, maybe 15 by 20 feet, dominated by a control panel that looked like something from a 1960s NASA launch facility. Dozens of dials, switches, and analog readouts covered the surface. Behind it, filing cabinets lined one wall. A desk sat in the corner, papers still scattered across its surface, as if someone had just stepped away. But it was the small metal panel on the far wall that caught Elena's attention. About 2 feet square, set at chest height, with a keyhole in the center. No labels, no markings. Just brushed steel that looked newer than everything else in the room. "That's it," Sofia whispered. "That has to be it." Elena pulled out the small silver key her uncle had left. Her hands shook as she fitted it into the lock. For a moment, it didn't turn, and panic flared. What if this was the wrong lock? What if they'd come all this way for nothing? Then the key caught, turned, clicked. The panel swung open, revealing a storage compartment about 2 feet deep. Inside were 3 items: a metal document case, a leather-bound journal, and a rolled set of blueprints secured with twine. Elena lifted out the document case first. Heavy, fireproof, sealed with a combination lock. She set on the desk and tried the journal next. The first page, in Gerald's precise handwriting, Project Win Memory, Classified Research Notes, 1960 to 1987. Win Memory, Sofia read over her shoulder. What does that mean? Elena flipped through pages of technical drawings, mathematical equations, and notes written in a shorthand she couldn't decipher. But certain phrases jumped out: pressure differential measurement, real-time flow visualization, computational modeling. One page near the middle stopped her completely. It showed a device, something like a sphere covered in sensors, suspended in what looked like the wind tunnel. Below it, a caption, Prototype 7, Successful Test, March 1962. Accuracy, 99.7%. Military applications, confirmed. Mom, look at the date. March 1962. That's when he said the military made their first offer. Elena kept reading. The next pages detailed meetings with military officials, their increasing offers, their eventual threats. And Gerald's responses, growing more defiant each time. They don't understand what this could be used for. They only see weapons applications. I see weather prediction. I see aviation safety. I see climate science. The final entry was dated November 1987. Closed the factory today. Let everyone go. Told them the business failed, which is true enough. But the real work continues. I've hidden everything they want in plain sight. The patents I filed are incomplete, enough to seem credible, but missing the crucial innovations. The real designs stay here until someone who won't weaponize them takes over. Sofia had moved to the blueprints. She unrolled them carefully on the desk, using tape dispensers and rulers to hold down the corners. Mom, you need to see this. The blueprints showed the wind tunnel in incredible detail, not as it appeared now, but as a complete system. Cross-sections revealed internal structures Elena hadn't known existed. Sensor arrays, data collection systems, and something labeled computational chamber at the tunnel's far end. There's more to this tunnel than what we can see, Sofia said, tracing lines on the blueprint with her finger. Look, these panels on the interior wall, they're removable. Behind them is a whole network of measurement equipment. Elena looked at the document case, still locked. We need to open this. She tried Gerald's birth year. Nothing. The year the factory opened. Nothing. MIT graduation year. Nothing. Try 1962, Sofia suggested. March 1962, when he finished the prototype. Elena tried 0-3-1-9-6-2. The lock clicked open. Inside were documents organized in folders with typed labels. Patent applications, unfiled. Military correspondence. Licensing agreements, proposed. And at the bottom, a single folder marked, for my heir. Elena opened that one first. Inside was a letter, Gerald's handwriting again, but steadier than the previous one. This had been written years earlier. To whoever finds this, if you made it this far, you've proven you're more persistent than I expected. Good. You'll need that. What I've hidden here represents 30 years of aerospace research. Not just the wind tunnel itself, though that's valuable. The real innovation is in how I taught the tunnel to remember. Traditional wind tunnels test objects in real time. You put something in, turn on the fans, measure results. But those measurements are crude. You get average velocity, average pressure, general flow patterns. You miss the nuances. I developed a system that captures every variable in three-dimensional space over time. Thousands of data points per second. The tunnel doesn't just test, it remembers. It builds a complete mathematical model of exactly how air moves around any object. In 1962, I demonstrated this to the Air Force. They saw missile applications, bomb design. I saw commercial aviation, weather prediction, climate modeling. We disagreed about the future, so I hid it. The patents I filed are real but incomplete. They describe the hardware, but not the methodology, not the mathematics that make it work. That knowledge exists only in the documentation you're holding and in the computational chamber at the tunnel's end. The computational chamber contains punch cards, thousands of them. Each card represents a test run. Together, they form a database of aerodynamic information that was unprecedented in 1962 and might still be valuable today. The algorithms I developed to analyze that data are documented in the unfiled patents. Current value? I can't say. But consider, every airplane designed in the last 30 years had to be tested somehow. Every weather model needs accurate wind data. Every aerospace company needs precise measurement capabilities. I solved those problems in 1962. If my solutions are still relevant, they're worth millions. If they've been superseded, this is an interesting piece of history and nothing more. But I don't think they've been superseded. I think I was so far ahead that the world still hasn't caught up. Sell it, keep it, donate it to a museum, I don't care. Just don't let the military have it. They had their chance. Good luck. Gerald. Elena set down the letter with trembling hands. Sofia was already pulling out the patent applications, spreading them across the desk. There were dozens, some handwritten, some typed on an old typewriter, all meticulously documented. Mom, these are dated all through the 1980s. He kept working on this for 25 years after he refused to sell. Elena picked up one at random. Method and apparatus for multidimensional flow visualization. The abstract described a system for capturing and analyzing air movement with precision that exceeds current methodologies by factor of 100 or more. Another, computational analysis of aerodynamic data using pattern recognition algorithms. The date was 1984, years before most commercial computers were sophisticated enough for that kind of analysis. He was doing computational modeling before computers were really capable of it, Sofia said, reading over Elena's shoulder. That's why he used punch cards. He was building a database by hand that he knew would eventually be processed digitally. How do you know all this? I read a lot, Mom. And we did a unit on computer history. Sofia pulled out another folder. Look, licensing proposals. He was going to license the technology to universities and weather services. No military applications, just research and safety. The licensing proposals were detailed, professional, and completely unacted upon. Dozens of organizations listed. NOAA, NASA's Civilian Division, MIT's Aeronautics Department, Stanford, Boeing's Commercial Division. Each with proposed terms and detailed descriptions of what they'd be getting. But none of them had ever been sent. Gerald had written them, perfected them, and then locked them away. Why didn't he just do this? Elena felt frustration rising. If he wanted the technology used for good, why not license it to these places? Sofia found another letter, this one addressed to no one. I started the licensing process in 1988. Made contact with NOAA. They were interested, very interested. Then someone leaked word to the Pentagon. Suddenly, I had visitors, official ones, reminding me that some of my early work had been funded by military grants, suggesting that meant they had claims to anything I developed. They couldn't legally take it, but they could make the licensing process impossible, tie everything up in courts for decades. So I stopped, closed everything down, decided to wait until I was gone and the military's institutional memory had moved on. He sacrificed everything to keep this away from them. Sofia's voice was quiet. His career, his company, his chance to see the technology used. Everything. Elena looked around the control room at decades of accumulated dust and felt the weight of her uncle's choices. He could have been rich. He could have been famous. Instead, he'd spent 35 years as a recluse protecting work nobody knew existed. And now he trusted her with it. We need to know what this is actually worth, Elena said. We need an expert who understands aerospace patents and isn't connected to military contractors. How we find someone like that? Elena thought about the letter Gerald had written about his emphasis on universities and civilian applications. We find someone at a university, someone in aerospace engineering who doesn't take defense money. She pulled out her phone, one bar of signal, and searched aerospace engineering professor, civilian research, no military funding. The results were sparse. Most aerospace departments did at least some defense work. But one name kept appearing in articles about keeping research civilian. Dr. Judith Chun, Northwestern University. 57 years old, outspoken about the militarization of aerospace research, had turned down multiple Pentagon grants on principle. Elena found her university email and composed a message, trying to sound professional while explaining an insane situation. Dr. Chun, my name is Elena Rodriguez. I recently inherited an aerospace research facility from my uncle, Dr. Gerald Torres. His work includes unpublished patent applications and research data from the 1960s, 80s that he believed were significant. I'm looking for an expert opinion on potential value and applications. Would you be available for a consultation? I can provide documentation and access to the facility. Time-sensitive due to property conditions. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The message disappeared into the void of spotty cell signal, and Elena had no idea if it would even go through. Now what? Sofia asked. Now we look at the computational chamber. See if those punch cards are still there. They left the control room and descended to the tunnel floor. The blueprints had shown the computational chamber at the tunnel's far end, a separate sealed room access through a maintenance hatch. Walking the length of the tunnel felt surreal. Their flashlight beams illuminated curved walls covered in panels, exactly as the blueprints had shown. Some panels hung loose, revealing glimpses of the sensor equipment behind. Wires and delicate instruments that probably hadn't functioned in decades, but represented technology that had been revolutionary once. The maintenance hatch was sealed with another lock, this one requiring the larger brass key. Elena opened it and shined her light into a chamber about 10 feet square. The punch cards were there, thousands of them, stored in metal filing cabinets that lined 3 walls. Each drawer was labeled with dates and test parameters. Elena pulled open one at random, February 1967. Inside, cards were organized in perfect order, each one showing patterns of holes that represented data only a computer could read. He saved everything, Sofia whispered. Every test, every measurement for 25 years. Elena opened another drawer. March 1974. More cards, more data. Drawer after drawer, year after year. A physical archive of aerodynamic research that spanned 2 decades. How much data is this? Elena tried to estimate. Thousands of cards, each card holding, what? A few hundred bytes. More than that. Punch cards could hold about 960 bits of information. Sofia was examining one closely. If there are, say, 10,000 cards here, that's roughly a gigabyte of data. Maybe more. A gigabyte didn't sound like much in an age of terabyte hard drives. But this was a gigabyte of carefully curated aerodynamic measurements from when such databases didn't exist. Every airplane tested, every wind pattern measured, every experiment documented by a man who'd been decades ahead of his time. Is it worth anything? Elena heard the desperation in her own voice. I don't know, Mom, but it's definitely something. Uncle Gerald wouldn't have protected it this carefully if it was worthless. They spent another hour exploring. Found the sensor arrays behind the removable panels, delicate instruments that looked like they belonged in a museum. Found Gerald's handwritten notes taped to various sections, explaining modifications and improvements. Found a library of reference materials in the control room. Textbooks from the 1950s and 60s, research papers, correspondence with other scientists. And they found a locked safe under the desk, requiring yet another key they didn't have. Elena's phone buzzed, an email notification. She almost ignored it, then saw the sender, Dr. Judith Chun. Ms. Rodriguez. I remember Gerald Torres. Met him once at a conference in 1978. Brilliant man who walked away from a major career because he refused to compromise on principles. If you've inherited his research, you've inherited something potentially valuable, not just monetarily, but historically. I'm in Chicago this week for a conference. I could drive to Oak Ridge tomorrow afternoon. If his work is what I think it might be, we should discuss preservation and documentation before considering any commercial applications. Please send me the facility address. I'll arrive around 2 p.m. tomorrow. Dr. Chun. Elena read the email 3 times. Tomorrow. An actual expert would be here tomorrow to tell them if Gerald's life work was treasure or just very expensive garbage. We need to organize everything. Sofia said, already moving back toward the control room. All the documents, all the patent applications. We need to show her the blueprints and the punch cards in. Sofia, breathe. We'll be ready. But Elena felt the same urgency. They had one shot at this, one chance to understand what Gerald had left them before the town forced demolition or developers pressured them to sell, or whatever other complications were waiting to crush this fragile hope. They spent the next 3 hours cataloging everything they'd found. Elena photographed every document, every page of the journal, every patent application. Sofia created an inventory on Elena's phone, listing contents of each drawer in the computational chamber. By the time they left the factory, it was past 2 p.m., and they were filthy with decades of accumulated dust. But they had documentation. They had evidence. They had enough information to show Dr. Chun that this wasn't just a delusional, homeless woman grasping at straws. Now we look at the computational chamber. See if those punch cards are still there. They left the control room and descended to the tunnel floor. The blueprints had shown the computational chamber at the tunnel's far end, a separate sealed room access through a maintenance hatch. Walking the length of the tunnel felt surreal. Their flashlight beams illuminated curved walls covered in panels, exactly as the blueprints had shown. Some panels hung loose, revealing glimpses of the sensor equipment behind. Wires and delicate instruments that probably hadn't functioned in decades, but represented technology that had been revolutionary once. The maintenance hatch was sealed with another lock, this one requiring the larger brass key. Elena opened it and shined her light into a chamber about 10 feet square. The punch cards were there, thousands of them, stored in metal filing cabinets that lined 3 walls. Each drawer was labeled with dates and test parameters. Elena pulled open one at random, February 1967. Inside, cards were organized in perfect order, each one showing patterns of holes that represented data only a computer could read. He saved everything, Sofia whispered. Every test, every measurement for 25 years. Elena opened another drawer. March 1974. More cards, more data. Drawer after drawer, year after year. A physical archive of aerodynamic research that spanned 2 decades. How much data is this? Elena tried to estimate. Thousands of cards, each card holding, what? A few hundred bytes. More than that. Punch cards could hold about 960 bits of information. Sofia was examining one closely. If there are, say, 10,000 cards here, that's roughly a gigabyte of data. Maybe more. A gigabyte didn't sound like much in an age of terabyte hard drives. But this was a gigabyte of carefully curated aerodynamic measurements from when such databases didn't exist. Every airplane tested, every wind pattern measured, every experiment documented by a man who'd been decades ahead of his time. Is it worth anything? Elena heard the desperation in her own voice. I don't know, Mom, but it's definitely something. Uncle Gerald wouldn't have protected it this carefully if it was worthless. They spent another hour exploring, found the sensor arrays behind the removable panels, delicate instruments that looked like they belonged in a museum, found Gerald's handwritten notes taped to various sections, explaining modifications and improvements, found a library of reference materials in the control room, textbooks from the 1950s and 60s, research papers, correspondence with other scientists, and they found a locked safe under the desk, requiring yet another key they didn't have. Elena's phone buzzed, an email notification. She almost ignored it, then saw the sender, Dr. Judith Chun. Ms. Rodriguez. I remember Gerald Torres. Met him once at a conference in 1978. Brilliant man who walked away from a major career because he refused to compromise on principles. If you've inherited his research, you've inherited something potentially valuable, not just monetarily, but historically. I'm in Chicago this week for a conference. I could drive to Oak Ridge tomorrow afternoon. If his work is what I think it might be, we should discuss preservation and documentation before considering any commercial applications. Please send me the facility address. I'll arrive around 2 p.m. tomorrow. Dr. Chun. Elena read the email 3 times. Tomorrow. An actual expert would be here tomorrow to tell them if Gerald's life work was treasure or just very expensive garbage. We need to organize everything, Sofia said, already moving back toward the control room. All the documents, all the patent applications. We need to show her the blueprints and the punch cards, and Sofia, breathe. We'll be ready. But Elena felt the same urgency. They had one shot at this, one chance to understand what Gerald had left them before the town forced demolition or developers pressured them to sell, or whatever other complications were waiting to crush this fragile hope. They spent the next 3 hours cataloging everything they'd found. Elena photographed every document, every page of the journal, every patent application. Sofia created an inventory on Elena's phone, listing contents of each drawer in the computational chamber. By the time they left the factory, it was past 2 p.m., and they were filthy with decades of accumulated dust. But they had documentation. They had evidence. They had enough information to show Dr. Chun that this wasn't just a delusional, homeless woman grasping at straws. Now we look at the computational chamber. See if those punch cards are still there. They left the control room and descended to the tunnel floor. The blueprints had shown the computational chamber at the tunnel's far end, a separate sealed room access through a maintenance hatch. Walking the length of the tunnel felt surreal. Their flashlight beams illuminated curved walls covered in panels, exactly as the blueprints had shown. Some panels hung loose, revealing glimpses of the sensor equipment behind. Wires and delicate instruments that probably hadn't functioned in decades, but represented technology that had been revolutionary once. The maintenance hatch was sealed with another lock, this one requiring the larger brass key. Elena opened it and shined her light into a chamber about 10 feet square. The punch cards were there, thousands of them, stored in metal filing cabinets that lined 3 walls. Each drawer was labeled with dates and test parameters. Elena pulled open one at random, February 1967. Inside, cards were organized in perfect order, each one showing patterns of holes that represented data only a computer could read. He saved everything, Sofia whispered. Every test, every measurement for 25 years. Elena opened another drawer. March 1974. More cards, more data. Drawer after drawer, year after year. A physical archive of aerodynamic research that spanned 2 decades. How much data is this? Elena tried to estimate. Thousands of cards, each card holding, what? A few hundred bytes. More than that. Punch cards could hold about 960 bits of information. Sofia was examining one closely. If there are, say, 10,000 cards here, that's roughly a gigabyte of data. Maybe more. A gigabyte didn't sound like much in an age of terabyte hard drives. But this was a gigabyte of carefully curated aerodynamic measurements from when such databases didn't exist. Every airplane tested, every wind pattern measured, every experiment documented by a man who'd been decades ahead of his time. Is it worth anything? Elena heard the desperation in her own voice. I don't know, Mom, but it's definitely something. Uncle Gerald wouldn't have protected it this carefully if it was worthless. They spent another hour exploring. Found the sensor arrays behind the removable panels, delicate instruments that looked like they belonged in a museum. Found Gerald's handwritten notes taped to various sections, explaining modifications and improvements. Found a library of reference materials in the control room, textbooks from the 1950s and 60s, research papers, correspondence with other scientists. And they found a locked safe under the desk, requiring yet another key they didn't have. Elena's phone buzzed, an email notification. She almost ignored it, then saw the sender, Dr. Judith Chun. Ms. Rodriguez. I remember Gerald Torres. Met him once at a conference in 1978. Brilliant man who walked away from a major career because he refused to compromise on principles. If you've inherited his research, you've inherited something potentially valuable, not just monetarily, but historically. I'm in Chicago this week for a conference. I could drive to Oak Ridge tomorrow afternoon. If his work is what I think it might be, we should discuss preservation and documentation before considering any commercial applications. Please send me the facility address. I'll arrive around 2 p.m. tomorrow. Dr. Chun. Elena read the email 3 times. Tomorrow. An actual expert would be here tomorrow to tell them if Gerald's life work was treasure or just very expensive garbage. We need to organize everything, Sofia said, already moving back toward the control room. All the documents, all the patent applications. We need to show her the blueprints and the punch cards in. Sofia, breathe. We'll be ready. But Elena felt the same urgency. They had one shot at this, one chance to understand what Gerald had left them before the town forced demolition or developers pressured them to sell, or whatever other complications were waiting to crush this fragile hope. They spent the next 3 hours cataloging everything they'd found. Elena photographed every document, every page of the journal, every patent application. Sofia created an inventory on Elena's phone, listing contents of each drawer in the computational chamber. By the time they left the factory, it was past 2 p.m., and they were filthy with decades of accumulated dust. But they had documentation. They had evidence. They had enough information to show Dr. Chun that this wasn't just a delusional, homeless woman grasping at straws. Elena felt panic rising. I don't have somewhere secure. I don't even have an apartment. Judith studied her for a long moment. Why did you come here? Really? Because I'm homeless and desperate, and this was the only thing I had left that might be worth something. Good. Honest. Judith pulled out her phone. I have colleagues at Northwestern who study historic aerospace research. We have secure storage. If you're willing to work with us and, actually collaborate, not just hand everything over, we can help preserve this properly. We can file the patents under your name. We can handle the military if they come sniffing around. In exchange for what? Research access. We want to study the methodology, publish papers about Gerald's work, maybe use the database for validation of modern models. You'd retain all commercial rights. We just want academic access. It sounded too good to be true, which usually meant it was. Why would you do this? Because Gerald Torres walked away from a major career to keep his research out of the wrong hands. Because that kind of integrity deserves respect. And because, frankly, I'm tired of watching everything in aerospace get funneled toward military applications. This is a chance to preserve civilian research from an era when such distinctions still mattered. She extended her hand. So, partners? We preserve Gerald's work together. Elena looked at Sofia, who nodded slightly. Looked at the control room, full of documents. Looked at the wind tunnel stretching away into darkness. Gerald had spent 35 years protecting this alone. Maybe it was okay to accept help now. Partners, Elena said, shaking Judith's hand. The next 72 hours moved with the controlled chaos of people racing against a deadline they couldn't see but knew was coming. Judith returned to Chicago and came back the following morning with 3 things: a rental truck, 2 graduate students who specialized in data preservation, and a lawyer named Sarah Kim who handled intellectual property for Northwestern's research partnerships. They set up operations in the factory's control room, which became a strange hybrid of archaeological dig and tech startup. The graduate students, Marcus and Priya, both in their late 20s, approached the punch cards with the reverence of people handling ancient manuscripts, which Elena supposed they essentially were. These are IBM format cards, Marcus explained as he carefully photographed each one before removal. Standard 80-column configuration. We'll need to find a working card reader or build an emulator to extract the data digitally. How long will that take? Elena watched him work with a mixture of fascination and anxiety. Weeks for full conversion. But I can get you preliminary data analysis within days if we prioritize key data sets. Priya was documenting the sensor arrays, creating a complete map of the wind tunnel's internal systems. Dr. Torres was decades ahead, she kept saying. Look at this pressure transducer placement. He understood turbulent flow dynamics before we had computers powerful enough to model it properly. Sarah Kim, the lawyer, had taken over the motel room desk and was working through the patent applications with surgical precision. She'd spread them across both beds, organizing by date and technical category. These are solid, she said when Elena checked in after the first day. Really solid. The fact that they were never filed is actually advantageous. The patent clock never started. If we file now, you get full protection as if they were new applications. But the technology is from the 1960s. Won't that matter? Not if the methodology was never published. Patent law cares about novelty at time of filing, not when you invented it. Gerald kept these secret, which means they're still novel as far as the patent office is concerned. Sarah pulled out one application in particular. This one, the real-time computational flow analysis. This could be huge. The methodology describes using pattern recognition to predict aerodynamic behavior based on historical data. That's basically early machine learning applied to fluid dynamics. Machine learning didn't exist in 1962. Exactly. Gerald invented a primitive version without knowing that's what he was doing. He called it pattern-based predictive modeling, but the math is essentially neural network precursor theory. Sarah looked up with an expression of awe. Your uncle was scary brilliant. Elena felt pride, mixed with grief for a man she'd barely known. Can we file these without attracting attention? We can file quietly. But once they're published, and patents get published 18 months after filing, people will notice. Especially if certain organizations are watching for Torres-related applications. So we have 18 months before this becomes public? Less if someone's actively monitoring patent databases. The military has algorithms that flag keywords and inventor names. We file anything with Torres and aerodynamic testing, they'll probably know within weeks. That was sobering. What do you suggest? File everything at once. Multiple applications, all different aspects of the research. Creates so many patents that they can't challenge them all simultaneously. It's a flood strategy. Overwhelm the system before anyone can organize opposition. How many applications can we file? Sarah gestured at the patents spread across the beds. I've identified 17 distinct innovations here. Some are incremental improvements on each other, but 17 could stand as independent patents. We file all 17 simultaneously, and even if military lawyers challenge them, they'll be fighting on 17 different fronts. How much will that cost? Filing fees alone, about $35,000. Legal fees for preparation and prosecution. I'm giving you academic rates, another $60,000. Total around $95,000 for the whole package. Elena's stomach dropped. She had maybe $2,000 left from the travel fund after motel and food expenses. $95,000 might as well be $1 million. Sarah must have seen her face. Northwestern can front the costs if you're willing to formalize the partnership. We take a small percentage of any licensing revenue to recoup expenses. You'd still retain majority ownership and control. How small a percentage? 20% of net revenue after our costs are covered. You keep 80% of everything. Elena tried to do the math. If the patents generated the $500,000 Judith estimated, 20% would be $100,000, still leaving Elena with $400,000. Life-changing money even after the university's cut. What if they generate nothing? What if nobody wants to license them? Then we're out the filing costs, and you own nothing. The partnership agreement protects you from downside risk. We're betting on the patent's value, not charging you for services regardless of outcome. It sounded fair, more than fair, but Elena had learned to be suspicious of anything that sounded too good. Why would Northwestern take that risk? Because Judith believes in this, and she has enough clout in the department to authorize speculative investments in promising research. Also, frankly, if these patents are as valuable as we think, 20% of significant revenue is better than 0% of nothing. Elena thought about Gerald, who'd spent 35 years trusting no one, protecting everything himself, but even a brilliant engineer with resources and knowledge. Elena was a waitress who'd been homeless 3 weeks ago. She couldn't do this alone. Okay, let's formalize the partnership. Sarah produced papers she'd apparently prepared in advance. Elena read through them carefully. The lawyer had made everything remarkably clear. Northwestern would handle patent filing and legal defense. Elena retained 80% ownership of all intellectual property. The university could use the research for academic purposes. Commercial licensing required Elena's approval. Either party could terminate the agreement with 90 days' notice. She signed. Sarah witnessed. And just like that, Elena had a partner with resources to fight whatever was coming. Back at the factory, the extraction continued. Marcus and Priya had carefully removed about a quarter of the punch cards, each one photographed and cataloged before being packed in climate-control containers. Judith was in the wind tunnel itself with an engineer from Northwestern's facilities department, assessing whether the structure could be disassembled and relocated. "It's modular," Judith explained when Elena joined them. "Gerald built it in sections that bolt together. Theoretically, we could take it apart and rebuild it at Northwestern. Make it a working research exhibit. Would that cost another fortune? Probably. But there's grant funding for historic preservation of significant scientific equipment. If we can get this registered as a National Historic Landmark, and I think we can, there's federal money available." Elena looked at the tunnel stretching away into darkness. Taking it apart and moving it felt both audacious and appropriate. Gerald had built it to last. Might as well let it keep lasting somewhere. It could be useful. Do it. Figure out what it would take. That evening, Elena got a call from Martin Reeves. Town council voted. They're giving you 30 days to submit renovation plans or schedule demolition. If you do neither, they'll condemn the property and charge you for city-contracted demolition. How much would that cost? $50,000 to $75,000. They put a lien on the property for the amount. More money Elena didn't have. What if I submit renovation plans? Then you'd need to actually renovate, which would cost, honestly, probably $200,000 to make this building safe and functional. Unless you're planning to invest that kind of money, demolition is really your only option. Elena thanked him and ended the call. Then she told Judith, who was reviewing the day's documentation work in the motel room. 30 days, Judith said. We can work with that. Marcus and Priya can have the punch cards extracted in 2 weeks. The documents are already photographed. The tunnel disassembly will take longer, but we can at least get critical components out. And then what? The building gets torn down and we lose everything that's still inside. Then we make sure everything valuable is out before that happens. Elena, the building is already dying. We're in triage mode. Save what we can, document what we can't, and accept that some things are lost to time. It was pragmatic and depressing and probably correct, but it still felt like losing. Sofia had been quiet through most of this, doing homework on the motel bed while adults made decisions about her future. But now she spoke up. What about the safe? Everyone turned to look at her. The safe under the desk in the control room. We never opened it. What if there's something important inside? Judith and Elena exchanged glances. In the chaos of extraction and documentation, they'd forgotten about the locked safe. We don't have a key, Elena said. And I'm not sure we should force it open. That feels like violating Uncle Gerald's privacy. Sofia finished. But Mom, he left everything else for you. Why would he lock one thing away? That was a good question. Everything else had been accessible. Hidden, but accessible once you had the right keys. Why make one safe impossible to open? Unless it wasn't impossible. Unless Gerald had left one more clue. Elena pulled out his letters and read them again, looking for anything she'd missed. The first letter mentioned the key and the tunnel. The second explained his research and motivations. But there was a third page she'd only skimmed, a handwritten note at the bottom of the document case. She read it now more carefully. P.S. If you're thorough, you'll find the safe. If you're smart, you'll know the combination. It's the only thing that matters. The rest is just data. This is the proof. The only thing that matters. The proof of what? He left a clue about the combination, Elena said. Something he expected me to figure out. They brainstormed for an hour. Birth dates, significant years, patent numbers. Nothing worked. Sofia tried mathematical sequences from the journal. Marcus tried dates from the punch cards. Priya tried coordinates from the facility's blueprints. Finally, Judith said, What if it's not about Gerald? What if it's about you? Me? He barely knew me, but he knew your father, and he chose you specifically as his heir. Judith looked at the letter again. He says, if you're smart, you'll know. Not figure out. No, like it's something personal. Elena thought about her father, about the few times Uncle Gerald had appeared in their lives. About my birthday, she said suddenly. My father's birthday. His death date. She tried them all. Nothing. Then Sofia said quietly, What about my birthday? Elena stared at her daughter. You weren't born when Gerald wrote most of these documents, but I was born when he wrote the last letter, the one that mentions me by name. He knew about me. It was a long shot, but Elena tried it. 0823215. August 23rd, 2015. The day Sofia was born. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single object, a prototype device about the size of a shoebox. Spherical, covered in what looked like sensors, with a data port on one side and a small plaque on the bottom. Prototype 7, March 1962. The device from Gerald's journal. The one that had demonstrated 99.7% accuracy. The one the military had wanted. Next to it was a flash drive, anachronistic and modern, clearly placed there recently, and one final note. This is the only working prototype. I destroyed the others to keep them from being seized. This one I preserved because it represents proof of concept. The flash drive contains test data from March 1962, the demonstration that convinced the Air Force my system worked. The device itself is obsolete. We have better sensors now, but the data is timeless. It proves my methodology, shows exactly how accurate real-time aerodynamic measurement can be when done correctly. If you need to prove value to investors or licensees or anyone else who doubts, show them this. Show them 1962 technology achieving accuracy that many modern systems still can't match. Use it wisely. Use it to build something good. Judith picked up the prototype with the care of someone handling a museum piece. This is significant, not just as research equipment, but as historic artifact. This should be in the Smithsonian. But it's proof, Sofia said. Proof that Uncle Gerald's work was real and valuable. It's both, Judith agreed, which makes it invaluable. They took the prototype and flash drive back to the motel. Marcus extracted the data immediately. Video footage of the 1962 wind tunnel tests, showing the prototype device measuring airflow around various objects with precision that was indeed remarkable for the era. He's measuring turbulent eddies down to millimeter resolution, Marcus said, watching the footage. In 1962, we didn't have digital computers capable of processing this kind of data in real time until the 1980s. So how was he doing it? Elena asked. Analog computation. Look, Marcus pointed to equipment visible in the background of the footage. Those are analog computers. Mechanical systems that use physical components to model mathematical relationships. They were common for complex calculations before digital computers. But using them for real-time flow analysis? That's ingenious. Priya was reading through technical specifications included on the drive. He essentially built a mechanical neural network. The sensors feed data to analog processors that pattern match against known flow behaviors. It's crude by modern standards, but the fundamental approach is sound. Can we replicate it digitally? Judith asked. Absolutely. In fact, we could probably improve on it significantly using modern sensors and processing. The methodology is what matters, and that's clearly documented. They worked through the night, documenting everything, backing up data to multiple locations, preparing preliminary patent applications. Sarah joined them via video call, taking notes and asking questions about technical specifications. By dawn, they had a plan. File 17 patent applications covering Gerald's methodology and innovations. Digitize the complete punch card database. Preserve the prototype as historic artifact. Write academic papers documenting the research. And most importantly, do all of it in the next 30 days before the building came down. Elena fell asleep around 6 a.m. and woke 3 hours later to her phone ringing. Unknown number, but she was getting used to those. Ms. Rodriguez? This is Colonel James Mitchell, U.S. Air Force. I'm with the Technology Security Division. I understand you've recently taken ownership of the Torres facility in Oak Ridge. I'd like to discuss that property with you. The military. Already. Somehow they've found out. Elena put the phone on speaker so Judith and Sarah could hear. What would you like to discuss, Colonel? Dr. Torres conducted some research in the 1960s that may have national security implications. We'd like to review any documentation or equipment that remains on site. Just a routine security assessment. Routine after 35 years? A pause. Dr. Torres was uncooperative during his lifetime. Now that there's new ownership, we're hoping to resolve some long-standing questions about his work. What questions? That's classified. But I can tell you that if his research touched on certain technologies, there may be restrictions on what you can do with it commercially. We'd like to determine that before you make any irreversible decisions. Judith was shaking her head firmly. Sarah was typing furiously on her laptop. Colonel, I appreciate your concern, but the property and everything in it belongs to me. Unless you have a warrant or specific legal authority, I'm not obligated to provide access. Ms. Rodriguez, I'm trying to be courteous, but if we determine there are national security concerns, we have legal mechanisms to secure the material. It would be much simpler if you cooperated voluntarily. I'll need to consult with my attorney and get back to you. Of course, but please don't make any decisions about selling or licensing Dr. Torres' work until we've had a chance to review it. Some of his research may be subject to export controls or other restrictions. The call ended. Elena looked at Judith and Sarah. How did they find out so fast? Property transfers are public record, Sarah said. They were probably monitoring for exactly this. The question is what they'll do now. Can they actually seize everything? Not easily. They need to prove the research was developed using military funding or contains classified information. Gerald was careful. He took private money after the Air Force contract ended, and nothing was ever classified because he never shared it with them. They can make noise, but they don't have legal ground for seizure. They can make our lives difficult, though, Judith added. Tie up the patents in security reviews. Question every licensing deal. Make it expensive and time-consuming to commercialize any of this. Elena felt anger building. Gerald had spent 35 years keeping his work away from people like Colonel Mitchell. She'd be damned if she'd let them take it now. How fast can we file the patents? Sarah checked her laptop. Applications are ready. I can file electronically today. They'll be in the system by tonight. Do it. File everything. And make sure it's clear that all this research was privately funded and never classified. Already documented. Gerald kept meticulous records of his funding sources. It's all private grants and personal money after 1963. Good. Then file. The next 24 hours were tense. Sarah filed all 17 patent applications simultaneously, a flood of intellectual property claims hitting the patent office in one coordinated wave. Judith arranged for the prototype to be transported to Northwestern under museum loan conditions. Marcus and Priya worked around the clock extracting punch cards, and Elena stayed at the factory, helping pack equipment and documentation, feeling like they were robbing a tomb before grave robbers arrived, which in a sense they were. Colonel Mitchell called twice more. Elena didn't answer. He left voicemails that became progressively less courteous, mentioning obstruction of legitimate security review and potential legal consequences. Sarah filed responses documenting that all materials were privately developed and not subject to military jurisdiction. The responses were professional and thorough and amounted to a polite go-away. On day 4, actual military personnel showed up, 2 men in Air Force uniforms accompanied by Martin Reeves, who looked deeply uncomfortable. They have some kind of authorization, Martin said quietly as they approached. I don't understand a legal basis, but they claim right of review. The senior officer introduced himself as Major Pearson. Ms. Rodriguez, we're here to conduct a national security review of the facility. We'll need access to all research documentation and equipment. No. Major Pearson looked surprised. People probably didn't say no to him often. Ma'am, this isn't optional. We have authority under Defense Production Act provisions. The Defense Production Act applies to current defense contractors, which I'm not. It doesn't give you authority to seize private property or privately developed research. Elena was reading from notes Sarah had prepared for exactly this situation. Dr. Torres ended all military contracts in 1963. Subsequent research was privately funded. You have no jurisdiction. Dr. Torres used military research grants initially. For research he completed and delivered in 1963. Everything after that was his own work, as documented in his financial records, which my attorney has reviewed. We'll need to verify that ourselves. Then get a warrant. Show probable cause that illegal activity occurred or classified material exists on the property. Until then, you're trespassing. Major Pearson's jaw tightened. You're making a mistake. We can make this very difficult for you. You're welcome to try. My attorney is Sarah Kim with Northwestern University. All communication should go through her. Elena handed him Sarah's business card. Now please leave my property. They left, but the threat hung in the air. This wasn't over. That night, Judith gathered everyone in the motel room. Elena, Sofia, Sarah, Marcus, and Priya. We need to accelerate. The military is going to push harder. We need everything valuable out of that building in the next 2 weeks. Can we do it that fast? Elena asked. If we work around the clock. I've called in more graduate students. We'll run shifts, documentation during the day, extraction at night. 2 weeks from now, that building can collapse for all we care because everything important will be safe. They worked like people possessed. 10-hour days became 12-hour days, became working until they literally couldn't stay awake. Elena had quit her job at the diner, called her manager and explained she had a family emergency, which was true enough. Money was running low, but Judith had advanced her some fund from the partnership agreement to cover expenses. Sofia helped where she could, organizing documents and cataloging items. She'd become the unofficial inventory keeper, maintaining spreadsheets of everything they'd extracted and where it had been sent. On day 8, they had another visit, this time not military but corporate. A man in an expensive suit introduced himself as Richard Chun from Aerodynamic Solutions. We've heard about the Torres facility, he said smoothly. We're interested in licensing Dr. Torres' wind tunnel methodology. We're prepared to make a substantial offer. How did you hear about it? Word gets around in our industry. Dr. Torres was a legend. Even if he was reclusive, we'd be honored to bring his work to commercial application. What kind of offer? $2 million for exclusive licensing rights to the aerodynamic analysis patents. Another $1 million for the historical database. $3 million. Elena tried to keep her face neutral. I'll need to discuss with my partners. Of course. But we want to move quickly. We understand there may be other interested parties. After he left, Judith did some research. Aerodynamic Solutions is a defense contractor. 70% of their revenue comes from military contracts. They're basically a front. If you license to them, the military gets access to everything. So it's a trap. It's an attempt at an end run around the legal obstacles we've created. They can't seize it, so they're trying to buy it through a proxy. What do we do? Say no, and document the offer so we have evidence of their tactics if this gets legal. Elena declined the offer. Richard Chun called back twice with increased amounts, $5 million, then $8 million. Elena said no each time. The desperation in his voice grew with each call, which told her they were right about who he really represented. On day 12, they had extracted everything critical: punch cards, documentation, the prototype, removable sensor equipment. The wind tunnel itself was too large to move quickly, but Judith had documented it thoroughly enough that they could reconstruct it if needed. On day 13, Elena got a call from someone different. Dr. Margaret Stills, NASA's chief historian. Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you've inherited Gerald Torres' research facility. I'm calling because Dr. Torres' work represents an important piece of aerospace history. NASA would like to discuss preserving some of his materials for our archive. This felt different, less threatening. What did you have in mind? The prototype device, Prototype 7 from 1962. It represents a significant advancement in aerodynamic measurement for its era. We'd like to display it in the Air and Space Museum as part of our exhibit on aerospace engineering innovation. We'd provide proper attribution, of course. What about licensing the technology? That would be up to you. We're interested in the historical artifact, not the commercial applications. Though I should mention, if you're planning to license the methodology, NASA's Aeronautics Division might be interested in non-exclusive access for research purposes. Research purposes, not military applications. Correct. NASA's aeronautics work is civilian-focused. We study aircraft efficiency, safety, environmental impact. The military has their own research divisions. Elena felt something shift. This was what Gerald had wanted: civilian applications, research purposes, using his work to improve aviation rather than weaponize it. I'd like to discuss that. The exhibit and the research access. Excellent. I'll send you our standard agreements. And Ms. Rodriguez? Gerald Torres deserved better recognition than he received. I'm glad his work is finally getting the attention it merits. That conversation changed everything. If NASA wanted the prototype for their museum, it legitimized Gerald's work in a way private licensing never could. And if NASA was interested in research access, other civilian organizations would follow. Sarah drafted new licensing terms: non-exclusive research licenses for academic institutions and civilian government agencies. No defense contractors. No military access. Exactly what Gerald would have wanted. Within a week, they had interest from 4 universities, 2 government weather agencies, and NASA's Aeronautics Division. The licensing fees weren't as high as the defense contractor had offered, maybe $2 million total instead of $8 million. But it was clean money for purposes Elena could believe in. On day 23, they held a final meeting in the control room. The space was nearly empty now. Filing cabinets removed, documents packed, equipment extracted. Just the control panel remained, 2 integrated into the structure to remove safely. "We did it," Judith said. "Everything valuable is preserved. The patents are filed. The licensing agreements are in progress. Gerald's work will be used for exactly what he intended." Elena looked around the empty room and felt both triumph and sadness. They'd won, but they'd also stripped this place of everything that made it special. Soon the building would be demolished, and nothing would remain but memories and documentation. "Thank you," she said to everyone. "All of you. I couldn't have done this alone." "You shouldn't have had to," Judith replied. Gerald was brilliant, but he was also paranoid and isolated. You had the wisdom to accept help. That's why this worked. They packed up the last items and prepared to leave. As Elena locked the control room door one final time, she thought about Gerald working here alone for 35 years, creating technology that could have made him rich and famous, but choosing principle over profit. She'd chosen the same thing. $8 million from defense contractors versus $2 million from civilian applications. The choice was obvious, even if it meant less money. Some things were more important than maximum profit. The town council approved demolition to begin in 30 days. Elena signed the paperwork without regret. The building was dying anyway. Better to let it go than watch it slowly collapse. But there was one final surprise. On day 28, Elena received a letter from the National Park Service. The wind tunnel had been granted emergency National Historic Landmark status based on Judith's documentation. The designation came with a grant, $400,000 for preservation and relocation. Combined with Northwestern's facilities funding, they had enough money to actually move the wind tunnel, take it apart, transport it to Chicago, rebuild it as a working research exhibit. Gerald's creation would survive after all. The demolition happened on a cold morning in December. Elena and Sofia stood across the street and watched machines tear into the brick walls. It took less than 3 hours to reduce 70 years of history to rubble. But the rubble didn't matter anymore. Everything important had been saved, and watch the wind tunnel being reassembled. It looked smaller in the modern facility, surrounded by glass walls and explanatory exhibits. But it was whole, functional, ready to teach new generations of engineers about aerodynamic principles. The prototype sat in a display case nearby with a plaque. Prototype 7, Dr. Gerald Torres, 1962. Gift of Elena Rodriguez. Patent licensing revenue had started flowing in, not millions yet, but enough. Enough for a 2-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. Enough for Sofia to attend a private school with an aerospace engineering program. Enough that Elena had quit the diner and gone back to community college to finish her degree. Some things from Gerald's research would be published soon. Judith and her team had written 3 papers documenting his methodology. Gerald Torres' name would finally appear in academic journals, recognized for innovations that had been hidden for decades. And the military had finally backed off. Faced with public documentation, patent filings, and licensing agreements with NASA and universities, they'd accepted they couldn't claim jurisdiction. Colonel Mitchell had stopped calling. Elena sometimes thought about the moment in the motel when she'd read Gerald's first letter, when she'd been homeless and desperate and convinced the factory was worthless, when giving up would have been so easy. But she'd driven to Illinois anyway, had trusted that maybe, just maybe, her uncle had left her something worth fighting for. He had, not just patents and data, but a lesson that integrity was more valuable than money, that some promises were worth keeping even when it cost everything, that doing the right thing didn't always make you rich, but it made you someone you could look at in the mirror. Sofia ran up, excited about a school project she was working on. "Mom, guess what? My aerospace class is doing a unit on historic wind tunnels, and Mrs. Patterson says we could do a field trip here. I get to show everyone Uncle Gerald's work." Elena pulled her daughter close. "He'd be proud of you. I think he'd be proud of both of us." She was right. Gerald had spent 35 years protecting his research alone, trusting that someday the right person would claim it and honor his intentions. He'd chosen Elena because he believed she was that person, and she'd proven him right. 6 months after the factory's demolition, Elena received one final surprise. A letter forwarded from Martin Reeves' office, postmarked before Gerald's death, but held in escrow with instructions to deliver 6 months after the inheritance was claimed. Inside was a handwritten note. "Elena, if you're reading this, you kept my research out of the wrong hands. You honored my wishes when taking the money would have been easier. Thank you. I never had children, never built a normal life. But I built something that mattered. And now you've made sure it continues to matter for reasons I'd approve of. That's legacy. That's family. Blood is just DNA. But choosing to do right when it's hard, that's real connection. Your father said you were stubborn. He was right. I'm grateful for that stubbornness. There's one last thing. A safety deposit box at First National Bank in Oak Ridge. Box 247. The key is taped to the back of this letter. Inside is money I set aside for whoever claimed the factory. Mad money, I called it. Emergency fund for someone starting over. Use it for whatever you need. School, apartment deposit, breathing room. Just promise me one thing. Spend some of it on something purely joyful. Not practical, not responsible. Something that makes you happy for no reason except that life is short and joy matters. Take care of Sofia. Take care of yourself. And remember that walking away from easy money because it's wrong money is something most people never have the courage to do. You did. You're remarkable. With respect and gratitude, Gerald. Elena peeled the tape off and found a small key. She and Sofia drove to Oak Ridge the next day, walked into First National Bank, and opened box 247. Inside was $175,000 in cash and bonds. Mad money for emergencies. Gerald's final gift. What we go to do with it? Sofia asked as they sat in the car, staring at the bank statement. Elena thought about Gerald's instruction. Spend some on something purely joyful. First, we're putting most of it in savings. Emergency fund, college fund, all the responsible things. And the purely joyful part? Elena smiled. How do you feel about a vacation? Somewhere with beaches and absolutely no factories or patents or aerospace engineering. Just sun and sand and doing nothing important. Sofia's face lit up. Really? Really? Gerald's orders. Something joyful. They went to Hawaii for 2 weeks. Stayed in a hotel with an ocean view. Ate in restaurants without checking prices. Built sandcastles and learned to surf, and spent an entire day doing absolutely nothing but lying on the beach reading. It was glorious. It was healing. It was exactly what Gerald had meant. On their last night, Sofia and Elena sat on the beach watching the sunset, and Sofia asked, "Mom, if you could go back to that morning when you got the eviction notice, if you could go back knowing everything that was going to happen, would you change anything?" Elena thought about it, about the terror and uncertainty, about sleeping in cars and fighting the military and working 18-hour days to save research she barely understood. "No," she said finally, "because it taught me something important, that we're stronger than we think, that accepting help isn't weakness, that sometimes the hardest path leads somewhere worth going. Uncle Gerald thought you were stubborn. He was right. Good. I'm glad you're stubborn. Sofia leaned against her mother. Because if you weren't, you would have sold everything to those defense contractor people. And Uncle Gerald's work would be making weapons instead of helping NASA design better airplanes. That was true. The easy choice, $8 million, would have betrayed everything Gerald had protected. But Elena had been homeless and desperate and still said no. That was something to be proud of. You know what else I'm glad about? Sofia said. What? That we're not sleeping in the car anymore. Elena laughed, and it felt good. Yeah, baby. Me too. They flew home the next day to their apartment in Chicago, to Northwestern's campus where Sofia had started volunteering in the aerospace lab after school, to Elena's community college classes, and the future she was building one semester at a time. The Torres patents would take years to fully commercialize. Maybe they'd generate millions eventually, maybe not. But it didn't matter anymore because Elena had already gotten what she needed. Proof that Gerald had been right about her. That she was the kind of person who could be trusted with something important. That she could keep a promise even when it cost everything. That night, after Sofia fell asleep, Elena opened the leather journal they'd taken from the factory. She'd kept it even though all the important information had been copied and archived. It felt wrong to let Gerald's personal writing end up in a university collection. She'd read it dozens of times, but tonight one passage stood out. March 15th, 1987. Had another visit from military contractors today. Offered $10 million for everything. I laughed in their faces. They don't understand that some things aren't for sale. They think I'm crazy, choosing poverty over wealth. They don't understand that living with yourself is worth more than living in luxury while betraying your principles. I'll die alone in this factory, but I'll die knowing I built something good and kept it good. That has to count for something. It counted for everything. Gerald had died alone, but his work lived on in ways that honored his intentions. His name would be remembered in aerospace history. His innovations would help improve flight safety and weather prediction and climate modeling. And his niece, the one he'd barely known but somehow trusted, had made sure of it. Elena closed the journal and looked around their apartment. At Sofia's school projects on the refrigerator. At the Northwestern acceptance letter Elena had framed. She'd been admitted to their engineering program starting next semester. At the framed photo of Gerald from the 1960s, standing in front of his wind tunnel, looking determined and principled and utterly certain he was doing the right thing. She understood him now in a way she never could have before. Understood the loneliness of standing by your principles when everyone said you were foolish. Understood the weight of protecting something important. Understood the quiet satisfaction of knowing you'd done right even when doing wrong was easier. Thank you, she whispered to the photograph, for trusting me, for believing I was strong enough, for showing me what integrity looks like. The photograph didn't answer, but Elena felt like maybe, somehow, Gerald knew that his sacrifice hadn't been wasted, knew that the right person had found what he'd hidden, knew that sometimes, rarely, impossibly, the story ended the way it should, with promises kept and principles honored and good people winning despite all the forces arrayed against them. Elena went to bed feeling something she hadn't felt in years, genuine peace. Not because she was rich, she wasn't, not really, but because she'd been tested and hadn't broken. Because when offered easy money for betraying someone's trust, she'd said no. Because she was, as her father and Gerald had both recognized, stubborn enough to do the right thing even when it cost everything. And that was worth more than any fortune hidden in any factory. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.